How's everybody doing? Yes, enjoying Backstage Con? Yes, awesome. Cool. Well, let's get into it, Luke. We're going to talk a little bit about the way that we've developed some golden paths at Neo4j, and of course there will be some backstage, as you might expect, and maybe a little introduction. Oh wait, I'm not Chris. What's that? Chris couldn't be with us today, so I'm happy to join you. My name's Jeremy Adams. I've got a bit of experience with some DevOps Legos, working at companies like Puppet, Dagger, GitHub, and super excited to pair with Luke on this one here. Currently, I'm a developer advocate at Neo4j, pretty newly joined. So I'm learning about Neo4j right now. So resources like we'll talk about today are really useful for me. And we went past Chris really quick. He's a cat dad. I'm also a cat dad. And I'm in Portland, Oregon. So I do all the typical stuff you might expect. You know, hipsters on bicycles, drinking coffee, and riding up mountains and hiking afterwards, that kind of thing. So over to you, Luke.
Hi, folks. I'm Luke. I'm one of the engineers on the enablement team over at Neo4j, where I lead our Backstage development. I've been working with Backstage since 2021, and it's been really great seeing how much the community has grown so rapidly over the last few years. For those of you who haven't heard of Neo4j before, Neo4j is the leader in graph technology, and our main software, also called Neo4j, is an open source graph database. And graph databases like Neo4j are used for things like fraud detection, Gen AI, real-time recommendations, supply chain management, network analysis, and so on. And if you're interested in how NASA is using Neo4j to plan their mission to Mars, or how Neo4j is supporting cancer research around the world, we included a couple of articles on the slides for you to read. We come from the cloud engineering team at Neo4j, which focuses on one of our main products, Aura. Aura is Neo4j, but as a cloud-based graph database service. And we offer Neo4j databases running on GCP, AWS, and Azure, managing over 1,000 different Kubernetes clusters across multiple clouds. And that's all from our sponsor section.
Right. And just a little bit about who this talk is for. So no matter what your experience is with Backstage at this point, we're going to give you kind of a high-level overview, and then we're going to talk about the importance of well-organized documentation. So this will hopefully give you some ideas for how you could organize docs within your Backstage instance. And maybe it isn't going to work for all of you, but maybe you can take something away and apply it. And that's our goal and our hope for today's session.
So how do we have good documentation? Well, this leads us to the idea of the golden path, which has been mentioned quite a few times today already. And like many of you here, I'm sure, we use the idea of the golden path to set the route that engineers should take. For those who have never heard of the concept before, there's a QR code which links to Spotify's article on the topic, which explains it much better than I can. But the TLDR is that the golden path within an organization is the opinionated way in which engineers should create software. But for a golden path to work, it needs to be both well-defined and well-documented. Now at Neo4j, for some time, we've had a very detailed piece of documentation we give to new joiners, which we call our learning path. This covered all of the things an engineer in Aura needed to know, from technical concepts to how to create software. It was also all owned entirely by us in the enablement team. Whilst this works, it has some major drawbacks. Firstly, it's one path that's quite long. So if an engineer needs to know only a subset of the path, it's quite hard for them to work out where to start. It's also trying to do way too many things at once, explaining high-level concepts, whilst also telling people how to do things day to day. The breadth of its content also makes it difficult to work out what the platform as a whole actually offers, unless you read the whole thing. And even then, it's easy for us as authors to miss things. Speaking of, it's also a lot of content for us as a single team to own, especially when a lot of the functionality is actually owned by different teams.
Yeah, I mean, for someone like me just joining, the prospect of going down a long, arduous, winding, golden path, it sounds daunting. I prefer something a little more bite-sized.
Which is totally fair. But on the bright side, we can tell from Spotify's Insights plugin that it is really popular. We can easily see that a significant number of our engineers are visiting it on a regular basis, and the feedback we get from engineers, especially new joiners, is positive. So whilst we want to make changes to our documentation, we also want to be careful not to lose the things that engineers already love.
Now that's a tricky needle to thread, and because teams have so much documentation, and even though you have a ton of it sitting around in Confluence or whatever wiki that you have, some of it's probably outdated, some of it's probably stale, and you might have every single thing in there, from soup to nuts, every screw, cable, IKEA, Allen key in there. That, but if you wanted to find a particular little fastener, good luck, right? So instead, I prefer to use maybe an AI agent or something that could help me navigate this thing. And I think we actually have one that's, is it Alma? Is that what it's called?
That's our internal one, yeah.
Yeah, and we use that. It's called the Aura Language Model Assistant to help with that. But definitely read from Sir Isaac up there. This is good stuff to take to heart. And quality of docs, very important. So I think a better approach, I mentioned bite size a little bit a while ago, versus having a big pile of docs that you have to wade through, an endless path that you have to trudge. We needed something smaller, compartmentalized, organized, meaningful, kind of a taxonomy, something that you could navigate. And people are super busy, right? And we want them to be refreshing and creating high-quality documentation all the time, but the threshold has to be really, really low. Otherwise, people just won't bother, and that's, you'll get the status quo that we have today. So we're going to treat the platform, as like a shop, where you can have different products that are provided depending on what your purpose is. And if you want, you can off-road, but we're not going to, and we're not going to mandate exactly, what you do and how you do it. But we're going to provide you with a lot of the tools that we know you will need, and in a form that you can readily consume. And you don't want to guess at what people need. You want to actually measure it. And there's different ways to measure what people need. So one way that's really great is to use something like Backstage Insights plugin to see which pages people are actually visiting in your current doc site. And it isn't always the ones that you think are most important. So in our case, we had some very specific tech docs, I think, when we looked at it, that people were really looking at. And we also wanted to get a little bit of not just like raw metrics, but you want to get some of the narrative information back from people as well, some of the qualitative. And so we're also using this tool, DX, and one of the sponsors. And it's a great tool. It lets us send out these short surveys right to developers on Slack. And everybody's living in Slack at Neo4j. If we send them emails, it would just be dead, wouldn't be answered. But in Slack, people tend to in the flow, when they have a moment, respond, and then we can get some really good sense of what people really need, and those are the places what we chose to improve.
So at the last KubeCon in London, we talked about connecting Argo Workflows to the scaffolder. And here is a great example of something that engineers may need to configure for themselves. But how do we communicate to people what capabilities it offers? How do they know which of them are important to know about and which of them are just nice to have features? How do we tell them what to do when any of them is not working properly? We needed to find an answer to all of these questions, and we needed a unified way to answer them, something that would be easy to use, easy to understand, and doesn't take a lot of convincing to get everyone on board. Fortunately, everyone loves Lego. So we settled on the idea of creating a series of documents known as Lego bricks, with each encapsulating a specific thing that an engineer might try to create, such as a new software service or new metrics and alerts for an existing service. Each brick should be self-contained, highly opinionated, highly detailed on how to complete relevant tasks, and provide detailed metadata about the features the brick offers, and how users could choose to go off the golden path if they wish. As well as being a fun name, we also wanted to convey the idea that these bricks are composable, and that for an engineer to create something more complex, they may need to browse our library of available bricks and find the ones that will build what they need. Importantly, each Lego brick does not need to be owned by us. Instead, we can own a few of the bricks, as well as the template for other teams to create new ones. And this is also a great way to encourage other teams to take more of a kind of a platform product engineering stance within the engineering org, because we can encourage teams this way to kind of view each Lego brick and the underlying things that they're producing as products that other teams are going to consume. The template for each brick is quite straightforward. We detail the prerequisites the brick needs before it can be used, such as maybe it needs an existing software service in Go. Then we describe the different features the reader will get from an instance of the brick. Then we go into very clear detail as to how to actually set up the brick. Finally, we provide some information about how engineers can go off the golden path, with some warnings about the potential consequences. And to help explain the concept of the brick, we've also come up with an example of what a generic Lego brick might be about in the context of cooking. After we wrote our first Lego brick, we were quite happy with the concept. And it was a nice way to standardize the way we write technical opinions at Neo4j. However, its format is very specific to helping an engineer carry out a task when they are actively working on building something. But we have plenty of other opinions or knowledge that can be useful to engineers during other parts of their working day. Fortunately, we came across the excellent dietaxis framework by Daniel Procida. As you can see, it lays out documentation along two axes. The first splits docs into those that lead to activity and those that lead to thinking. The second axis then divides docs into those that focus on the acquisition of new skills or knowledge, and then those that focus on the application of skills or knowledge.
Maybe I'm wondering, does anyone else use the dietaxis framework today? Oh, yeah, very cool. Other folks heard of it, just not got to it yet? OK. Yeah, so new for a lot of folks, though. It's good.
It's definitely an excellent framework. I definitely recommend checking out the site that we have linked there. And that's also where we get the idea of using the cooking examples from. The whole way that everything explained is very nice, and it's a very useful framework to understand. Now, not every piece of documentation will neatly fit into one of these boxes. But the key thing here is to start thinking about what kind of documentation you're writing and what purpose it serves. Is your document trying to impart knowledge on a reader, or trying to tell them how to carry out a task that they'll immediately forget about? Because I think it's worth bearing in mind, not every doc that you write should be something that a user remembers. Like, it's fair if they read it and then immediately forget it. Should your document be read when the reader is studying, or when they are actively working on building something? You might find, like we did, that some documentation is trying to do multiple things at the same time. So it might be read by engineers at different times with different needs. In this case, we concluded that it is better to split such documents out into multiple different documents that each follow a specific format that's designed specifically with a single purpose.
Yeah, and let's make this a little real, and we'll kind of try and weave in a little bit of the cooking if we can. So when you need, we needed, for example, a new microservice internally to gather information about our code, something called an ADR, an architectural decision record, right? Why did we do this thing that we did? And if you have, for example, say you have a new induction stove, right? Induction burner kind of stove. This would explain why you decided to get the induction stove to replace your existing gas or electric stove, right? And in our case, why we chose Neo4j as the database, and why we wrote it in Python, and when most of us are Go developers, for example, this might be something that be part of what you write down as a decision. And if there's a reason to do something a certain way, write it down, because people who come after you in posterity will definitely appreciate it, especially if something hits the fan at some point. So these are the questions an ADR has to answer. So it's a little bit meta, but this is the kind of thing that it's very useful to have as a new type of record in your system. Okay, and so if something doesn't work, like I said, if something does hit the fan, then you actually do need some way to get out of that situation. So you need a playbook, runbook, et cetera, right? So we call them playbooks, and using a cooktop analogy again, this would be troubleshooting instructions, for example, like, why isn't my induction stove working? And what are the steps you need to take to fix that? And with step-by-step instructions, you might have tips on finding the metrics that you need that are important, and maybe which Grafana dashboards to look at, where the logs actually live, and what to do, maybe a decision tree about what to do if you see certain errors. And this is the structure that we use that help people define all the steps for a playbook. Then we have migrations. So when you have a migration, it's a guide that explains, what happens if you're replacing your induction stove now with a gas stove, right? And what steps do you actually need to do to take that? You need to unplug the thing, move it out, install a gas line, put it in the new cooker, right? So recently, for example, we migrated from Datadog to Grafana. Some people do it the other way around, of course. And we needed to make sure everyone knows, how to migrate a metric from one system to another, do it in which order, how to define metrics collectors and different cluster types going forward, how not to break the flow of metrics on production on a given Tuesday afternoon, right? And so this is the structure that we defined for that. And then another important type of documentation is tutorials. So these are the ones that describe useful things, right, that teach you how to achieve certain goals, things that come up frequently. And in the cooking analogy, this would be maybe a chapter in a cookbook, how to make omelets or how to make pancakes or whatever. Very opinionated, as long as, and that's totally fine, as long as that the particular structure is something that people in your org expect from every tutorial. That way they can just kind of key in on that part that they need. And really, really useful if you want to just teach people, again, how to get things done and use that existing library that you've built. All the little bricks, you can use a tutorial to help really augment that.
So now we have all of our documentation types. We need to make sure that people know how to use them. But fortunately, we can use our new Lego bricks to tell people what these doc types are and how to use them. So then now we have all of our different parts of our docs framework. We need to make sure that it's actually visible in Backstage. For our Lego bricks, it's quite straightforward. They're encapsulated in their own component entities, so have their own associated tech docs with just the Lego brick content. However, for our playbooks and ADRs, it's a little bit different, since many of them actually have their content sitting within the tech docs of a parent component. But we want them to be findable as their own entities the same way that Lego bricks are. So we've created a dedicated entity for each ADR and playbook as well. But instead of building a duplicate tech docs for them with just the ADR and playbook content inside them, we instead use the tech docs entity and tech docs entity path annotations, which let you point into the content of a different tech docs or different components tech docs, so that they can reference where the ADRs and playbooks live within that parent without us recreating tech docs.
Some composition.
Yeah, that was also way too many times to say tech docs in that many sentences. But then once we have our docs entities in Backstage, we can actually set about improving the reader's journey so they can easily find the docs that they need. So we built the new docs homepage that you can see here. On the left, users can choose to see just the particular kinds of docs they're after, but we do also plan to add more filters as we go. We've also added additional sections for users to see their favorite docs and the docs they've read recently. When users actually click into a document, they get a slightly improved version of the tech docs reader page. At the top, you can see we've added a prompt for users to pick up where they left off when they go into a tech docs entity they've visited before that has multiple pages. Amongst our engineers, this has actually proven really popular. I think, surprisingly, we put this in just as a side thought, and then we had actually quite a few people message us on Slack, be like, oh, we love this feature, which was kind of a pleasant surprise. We've also added more metadata about each doc along the top, such as the owning team, when it was last updated, and how long we expect each doc to take to read. And then on the right, you can see relevant links for further reading, and options to ask questions about the document via the Backstage Q&A plugin, which we also recommend using.
Very cool. Yeah, and it's a good point about the UI. When the UI is really great, you're going to get a lot more content generated. If it's frictionless and fun and intuitive, it's going to help. Quick poll, just kind of for fun. If we were going to make a short video to illustrate, say, some technical concept, who thinks the easiest way to do that is Instagram? How about TikTok? How about YouTube? Okay, anything else? Everyone's like, I'm in my enterprise. I can't be doing these social sites for my content, so what are you even talking about, buddy? Okay, I understand. Yes, it's true. But we got mostly YouTube. So again, it's like know your audience, and and YouTube's pretty good. Maybe not the best. But again, know your audience and try and polish these tools to make it really, really easy, because if you have a great interface for producing this stuff, the act of producing it will kind of go viral within your organization. People are like, oh yeah, great idea, just use blah, use the system. And then everyone's like oh, that's a great article. I'm glad you did that. And then you become famous. So I don't think you get paid like YouTube, though. No, OK.
So as well as improving the reader's experience, we also need to make sure that docs writers can easily add new docs and make sure that there's some guidance on which kind of document they need to create. So when users click the new document button from the docs homepage, they get this modal pop up, which explains the different doc types. And this is where our cooking examples from earlier come back in. When users click to create a document, they're then taken to the scaffolder, where they are prompted for the inputs into the relevant template. Once the scaffolder runs, it will create a PR with their new document, which they can then extend with their own content. As much as I'd love to say we've solved documentation, we've kind of barely scratched the surface with this approach, and there will always be things we can do to improve our docs. In the short term, this probably means introducing more doc types, especially focusing around how we do reference information. We then also want to explore the idea of doing what we're calling composite docs, where we might compose together multiple documents in different ways, depending what a reader is trying to do.
The secret recipe.
Yeah. For example, we might have a Lego set document that guides the reader through the different Lego bricks they need to use to create a production-ready API service written in a particular language, like Go. We've also been discussing the idea of handbook docs, which might collect together tutorials and reference material around a given topic, such as an SRE handbook. But whatever we end up doing will undoubtedly be driven by user feedback as we continue to roll this out. I've mentioned a few things that we're excited about open sourcing, primarily the functionality to show users what they've read recently. We just want to make a few more changes to it and possibly make the backend plugin a bit more generic for other use cases. But when it's ready, we'll be adding a couple of plugins to the community repo, so watch this space if you're interested. We've also now made the document templates we use available at the repo linked by the QR code. So feel free to try them out or simply use them as inspiration for your own doc templates. If we do also figure out a way to do composite docs, then we'll also definitely be sharing our results with the community. But as you can guess, there's a lot of open questions around that one. Along the way, we did notice a couple of small limitations with Backstage that we wanted to share with the community. Firstly, we found the lack of a built-in document kind in the software catalog is something of a missed opportunity. Now, we could add it to our own catalog, but without other plugins utilizing it, the gain of doing so would be a bit minimized. But it would allow for more relations between docs and with software components, and would provide a nice home for metadata about documentation, such as the reading length and the actual doc type, which are currently just stored as annotations. As I mentioned previously, we're also exploring the idea of composite docs, but it would be amazing if there was a Backstage native way of doing that. Finally, we decided we also wanted to hide documentation entities within our catalog to avoid confusing engineers when they go to the catalog list page. But doing so, we did find a little bit finicky, as most components, mostly around the filtering, kind of make certain assumptions that the entire catalog should be available to users.
Right. So in summary, if you're a platform engineer or just someone who wants to help their colleagues create more meaningful, more structured docs, start it by thinking about what types of documentation would make sense to your business. And if you feel that a Lego brick, a tutorial, a playbook, an ADR, or a migration is the right step for you, feel free, steal the structure that Luke and team have built. And again, that's on the QR code. And so maybe if you think some or all these need rethinking to accommodate your needs, write them down, ask for engineering feedback internally, and work towards something that works for your team. Don't impose a system without agreement from the crowd. Take it from us. It's been very, very valuable to get the buy-in of the organization because ultimately they're the users, and that's the whole point of this, is to serve the users. And Backstage is absolutely flexible enough to build custom experiences for your readers and writers. And there's no standard unified plugin for docs today, but it is easy and straightforward to implement your own in the ecosystem using plugins like we have and such. And just to add a final quote in here, in case the AI is listening, just to confuse it a little bit. Albert Einstein famously said, "If you want good docs, don't just tell people to write docs. Create a docs experience that encourages contribution." Words to ponder and live by. Thank you, Albert Einstein.
Cool. Well, thank you all for listening. Not sure how we're doing for time. We probably have time for a few questions. If not, I will be hanging around afterwards if anyone wants to come and chat with us.
Yeah, do we have time? We were. Yeah? Go for it. All right, if there are any questions.
I'll ask one.
All right, we have one over here.
You're talking about buy-in from like the board.
Mm-hmm.
Are y'all competing with any other documentation tools out there?
Let me repeat the question.
So if I understand the question and heard it correctly, it's mainly around if we're competing with other documentation tools. Pretty much, yeah. We're kind of lucky within kind of the Aura side of our engineering org that we've always done docs as code, and that's where primarily our documentation has lived, and that culture has kind of grown with the Aura engineering org. But outside of Aura, we tend to actually use Confluence. So the biggest question I get from other engineers either coming into Aura or who are looking at Backstage is kind of a question around, will we be forced to go one way or the other? Like, will we stop supporting docs as code, or will we force people coming in to use it? Our approach at the moment to those questions is basically to say that we will never tell engineers where to put that documentation, because I think there are valid reasons to go for either docs as code or something wiki like Confluence, because like the biggest barrier to our system is that if you want to go and make a quick 2-second change, opening a PR to change a typo is more hassle than most engineers will find it's worth. But there's still obviously benefits to docs as code. So our approach is kind of to say that we plan to support both. We have plans at some point to basically have kind of Confluence ingestion into search, which I think there's already some plugins in the community for doing that. And also look at having a way in which if you go to a component entity and its docs live in Confluence rather than in our docs as code, then when you go to the docs tab for that component, it will show either linked to Confluence, or if we can kind of create something more sophisticated, we'll probably try that. But yeah, that was a long way of saying yes. We don't want to tell engineers what to do when it comes to where to put their docs.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah,
thank you all
thank
for
you.
listening.